Welcome back everyone. There was some problem with the connection. So we'll continue yesterday's chapter, but before that again uh, an announcement for the students who have not yet joined Unacademy. So there are two types of subscriptions, plus an iconic subscription. You can choose any of these according to your choice. In the iconic subscription, you will be given personal attention, personal coach. They will get you will be getting printed hard copies of the book. Your test series will be evaluated, and obviously test quizzes will also happen. So if you want to go for a plus plan for 24 month, if you take the subscription per month, you have to pay 1000 rupees. For 12 months 1500 per month, and 6 months if you take 1200 rupees per month. But additionally, if you choose any of this plan, then if you use the Yashas live code, then you will get additional 10% off. So what you're waiting for, let's crack it. So let's continue our journey now. We have stopped. You can give me comment in the comment box if there is any technical problem or any broadcast problem, so I'll be able to figure it out. So now we have studied about what was wrong with our economy before 1991 economic reforms took place, and everything was basically wrong. Just to give you a recap, banking structure was very poor. Government controlled banking system or banking structure. Nationalization of 20 banks took place during the 60s and 80s. Import export was almost negligent. Foreign investment was not coming. Government was having a very closed form of economic model. Then public sector undertakings, most of them were incurring losses. Private sector was not performing well due to license and quota raj that we have discussed yesterday. Now in 1991 we were standing at a brass tack, meaning we were about to implement financial emergencies. Now financial emergency has never been imposed in India, right? And when financial emergency is imposed, then government can force you to work for the government sector without any payment or consideration. Your bank account, whatever money you have in your bank account, can be seized and can be used for development or bringing the country out of this economic crisis. But it will be a chaotic situation. During that time, PV Narasimha Rao was the Prime Minister of India and Manmohan Singh was the Finance Minister. He called upon Manmohan Singh and said that we want to take our economy out of this crisis. But Manmohan Singh said that the bad economic policies that we are following from 1991 or 1951 onwards cannot be undone overnight, but I will try my best to do it. But he put for the condition that I don't want any kind of red tapeism. No minister is going to come to me and ask me that I want to do this, why you are doing this, why you are doing that. I need my own team to rejig the economy, to make big structural changes in the economy. And he was given a free hand. You see, maybe Manmohan Singh was not a very good prime minister, but what he did in the 1991 economic reforms was sort of a magic which was appreciated worldwide. And I've told you, this is studied in many foreign universities, and that prestigious one like Harvard, MIT, and Cambridge and Oxford, as a case study, for whether you're doing your finances, MBA in finance, or you're doing studying economics or whatever. What he did, he said that, see, our country is going through a lot of small problems, but if we target the small problems without solving the bigger ones, the bigger problem will give rise to another problem. So we will keep solving the problem and new problems will crop up. So we need to find out where the problem lies. And you see the beauty of his thinking. He went ahead to solve the bigger problems. He said that why our economy is not performing well, because there is license and quota raj and permit raj. License or permit raj means the same thing. Businesses are not coming up because the process of getting license is too stringent, leading to too red tapeism. It means too much of official hurdles are there, too much of paperwork are there. So a common man will never think about starting a business, manufacturing business. The only business he can think about is setting up a small eatery or setting up a small kirana store. So unless these people, common man, is thinking about venturing into businesses, taking a little bit of risk, economy can never grow. Big businesses cannot save the economy when there are a handful of big businesses. So what he did, he said that license and quota raj is the cancer for our economy. He abolished license and quota raj. It has to go. During that time, only 15 industries were reserved for which government will give you license. Then only you can operate. Today, there are only 6 industries which require licenses. Only 6. Can you imagine? Tobacco or anything related to cigarette production, cigar, cheroots or whatever related to tobacco, you cannot produce unless you have a license. Industrial explosives you cannot produce unless you have a license. Pharmaceutical products you cannot produce unless you have a license. Clear. Hazardous chemicals you cannot produce. Uh, then uh, uh, then anything that related to aeronautics, electronics you can produce, but you have to take license from the government. Only these 6 sectors were reserved for the government to give you license. Private sector can operate, but they have to obtain license. Then only you can operate. Yeah, distilleries manufacturing alcohol. I mentioned only 5. Distilleries manufacturing alcohol. You can only start this business after you obtaining license. You obtain license. And the sectors where like government doesn't give license, it means private sector cannot come. Government can give little bit of contract to the private sector, but it will be owned and operated by the government. It is nuclear energy, mining of anything related to nuclear energy. You see, for example, uranium, thorium, plutonium. All right, this government it is under the Department of Atomic Energy. All right, and railway transportation, railway production of atomic energy, mining of minerals related to production of atomic energy and nuclear weapons. But government has given away most of the activities is now performed in the private sector. Now government is a big competitor of the private sector. So overnight this was done. Then he said that, so this was a part of the industrial reform. This was a part of the industrial sector reform. What he did, he abolished license or permit Raj and quota Raj. It means businesses can now start and they can produce whatever quantity they want to produce. Market forces will determine the price of that particular commodity. Then he said that businesses cannot flourish unless there is oxygen available to the business, and for the business oxygen is nothing but capital. All right, but the financial sector is controlled by the government. Again, banks are controlled by the government, stock markets are controlled by the government, capital market controlled by the government. He said that government will have to let go. Government will have to allow market forces work for financial sector also. So we came up with financial sector reforms wherein we liberalized the insurance sector, the capital market and the banking sector. So we liberalized what? We liberalized insurance. Just hold on. Let me write it in one note. So under the financial sector reforms, what we did, we liberalized insurance sector, capital market. It means companies can raise money through the capital market. They can issue, corporate bonds. They can issue debentures, preference shares, IPOs and so on. So liberalize capital market, and we also liberalize the banking sector. He said to the government that no more nationalization of banks should take place, and for which we also set up Narasimhan Committee for Financial Sector Reforms. And he said, yes, we have to let go of this strong control of the government, because whichever sector the government is controlling, the government is not going to take rational decision based on the market forces of demand and supply. So government will have to let go these sectors. All right. Then we say that Indian companies cannot start every business. We have to open up our economy to foreign investment. We cannot wait for unemployment to decrease over a period of 30 years to generate more employment for 30 years. We need to quickly increase employment opportunities in the country, because remember, in the business cycle we have studied that unless demand, Keynes also said, demand is the big motivator in the economy. When you create demand, then suppliers will supply, production will kick up, and then it will generate employment. That employment will generate income for next group of individuals, and they will again create demand. again demand will create a next wave of production cycle, and then again it will start a next wave of employment. This cannot quickly happen. This cannot quickly happen if we keep our territory closed. In today's world, we have to globalize. There is a concept of comparative advantage and disadvantage. We are disadvantaged towards producing many commodities. We are technologically not advanced. So we have to ask those big companies to come and produce in India without obviously, sacrificing the benefits or the safety of the Indian industries. So we had reform in the external sector. We also had what is known as external sector reforms. External sector reforms. What did we had? Reform, remember the meaning of reform is to make anything better than before. External sector reform, we liberalized. We liberalized policies related to FDI, FIIs. Will be studying about FDI and FII in a while. Foreign direct investment, foreign institutional investment, exports and imports. You see, for most of the item, the peak rate of custom duty on import was reduced from 125% to 10%. Can you imagine? A reduction of 115%. It's a drastic, a revolutionary step, you can say. But Manmohan Singh also said that everything is good, but it will turn into bad if government is not responsible. So government will have to do something with regard to functioning of, with regard to its functioning. So we had fiscal sector reforms. Fiscal sector reforms. It means this reforms related to how government incur any kind of expenditure and from which are the sources government gets revenue. So in the fiscal sector reforms, we had reforms related to direct and indirect taxes. It was significantly reduced. We call it as rationalization of tax structure. The tax structure should be rational, it should not be irrational. You cannot charge 60% on a shampoo and 70 or 50 45% on a soap. These are normal goods people need to consume. But everybody was after his Manmohan Singh's life that if you are reducing the taxes, don't you think the government revenue will further go down? He said no, opposite will happen. Why? Because the taxes are very high, people are not consuming. So if you reduce taxes, the market price will reduce, demand will increase. Simple law of demand. Sometimes simple things people don't understand. So if you reduce the taxes by 20 or 30% and the demand increases by 50 or 60%, it means you will get additional tax revenue. Your tax revenue will not decrease because consumption base will increase significantly. Right? Rather than 100 people buying, now 1000 people will be able to purchase. So whatever you are losing out because the tax rates are reduced, you will gain significantly more because the sales will increase because the demand will catch up. And not only that, when the demand catches up, employment will increase. It means you will get more money from direct taxes. Businesses will earn profit. They will pay you more money through direct taxes. So you're increasing your tax base. And actually the same thing happened. In fact, rather than falling down, the government tax revenue significantly increased. This was out of the box thinking. So reforms related to direct and indirect taxes. All right. But not only that, reforms related to public expenditure, and receipts. How do government spend the money earned through taxes? That is also important. If you are wasting government's money and you are not creating any public infrastructure, that will be a problematic. So the money that is received from taxes will not only go for welfare of the people, social sector schemes, but will also boost infrastructure in the economy. So these are the big four, we say, reforms, which was introduced through what we known as new industrial policy of 1991. This is also popularly known as Rao Manmohan model of economic reform. So if they ask you what is Rao Manmohan model of economic reform, it means they are talking about new industrial policy of 1991. People were in disbelief. People were not able to, figure out that what is happening. How can government let go of its control of the private sector so quickly? But this is what was done. This was a revolutionary step. Business, in the business fraternity, people start to say that India got political independence in 1947, but we got financial independence only in 1991. The magic which was done by Manmohan Singh, we owe our life to him. The kind of living standard we have achieved today from 1991 till today. The seeds of those was sown by Manmohan Singh. So whatever the damage you could have done being the prime minister for 10 years, that is way less compared to what he did, the magic that he did in the 1991 economic reforms. Clear? Now, what is liberalization? Simple terms. How do you explain liberalization? See, liberalization is nothing but removing the restrictions of the government which is imposed upon the private sector and adopting a policy of laissez-faire. All right. So what does liberalization mean? Liberalization involve removal of restrictions imposed upon the private sector by the government and adopting a policy of laissez-faire. Laissez-faire, it means free from control. So in case of India, liberalization took place through industrial sector reform, financial sector reform, external sector reform and fiscal sector reforms. These were the four more important reforms which was undertaken by the government. All right. Yeah, you can copy it afterward because the recorded portions will be available to you later on, throughout. So you just listen to me right now. You can write it afterwards later on. Now, what is this FERA and FEMA? What is this FERA and FEMA? You see, before Manmohan Singh also said that we should abolish FERA, but he was not able to do it. But in 1999, we knew that we have to get rid of FERA and we have to adopt FEMA. Now, what is the difference? FERA stands for Foreign Exchange Regulation Act, whereas FEMA stands for Foreign Exchange Management Act. All right. What does FERA stands for? FERA stands for Foreign Exchange Regulation Act, whereas FEMA stands for Foreign Exchange Management Act. Now, what was wrong with FERA? FERA was very wrong. because most of the offenses with regard to export, import, inflow and outflow, foreign investment outflow and inflow, if there was some offense, there was some irregularity, then you can land up in jail. Many of the crimes were criminal in nature. Now there are two types of offenses. One is criminal, what is civil. One is criminal and one is civil. Now many people, they wanted to go into export and import business. They wanted to set up many businesses abroad. They wanted to set up their business here in India, but it did not happen. Why? Because of FERA. Because they knew that if any bureaucracy, somebody was asking me what is a bureaucracy. Bureaucracy is the official functioning of the government. For example, politician decides what should be the law in the parliament, but the implementation is done by the bureaucracy, from higher to lower, from IAS officer to state civil services officers to clerks to block development officers, so subdivisional officers in the village area, tehsildar, patwari and so on, from top to down. There is a chain or structure of bureaucracy. Clear? So, and there was a widespread corruption in bureaucracy. So any IAS officer can go and ask for a bribe, and if that person is indulging in export and import business, on frivolous ground, if he says that no, I'm not going to bribe you because I'm not doing anything wrong, on frivolous ground he will be sent to jail. Now you have to prove your innocence from the jail. So common man can not even think about putting their hand into export and import businesses. So during that time only Manmohan Singh said that we have to have foreign investments happening in India. We have to allow Indian businesses to go abroad and invest. We have to allow export and imports. We have to give more and more export and import licenses to the people. But it did not happen. But we realized that we should have done this long time back. Then we came up with Foreign Exchange Management Act. Remember, management is a more liberal term than regulation. Regulation is more closer to control. Management is like you are allowing the businesses to function through the free market, through the free market route. Most of the crimes which was criminal in nature became civil in nature in FEMA. It means I will not go to jail. There can be penalty imposed upon me, and if I think I am right, then I can even drag that official to the court of law. Before 1991 IAS, 1991 IAS officers were so strong, they had so much of power that they can write something in a paper, in their stamp paper, in their pad, and it will become a delegated legislation. It means he will have a little bit of legislative powers in his hand, which is not so right now. This has been taken away from the IAS officers. They were so powerful. So we completely overhauled the economy. So you see, FEMA was implemented and FERA was abolished in 1999. Clear? Next, now liberalization is not the only thing. When you liberalize, there are many things that you have to take into consideration. What are these things? Alright. Then privatization. What is privatization? Many students ask me, sir, privatization, what do you mean by privatization? Let me tell you one thing. If suppose two individuals having same physical characteristic, I ask them to run, let's say, a short marathon of 20 kilometers, 21 or 22 kilometers, whatever is the distance. And on the back of one individual, I put a backpack containing 30 kilograms of bricks. Alright. Containing 30 kilograms of bricks. And I ask them to run and complete the marathon. Who do you think is going to win the race? The person who is running without any baggage or the person who is running with the baggage? Obviously the person who is running without the baggage, he will win the race. He will be more efficient. Likewise, when government tries to do every business, government will lose its sight from the most important functioning of the government, that is governing the country. That is governing the country. Then there is a problem. Your primary objective is to ensure that the country is ruled better. Your primary objective is not to run businesses. And if you are running businesses, run those businesses which will protect the social structure of the country. And privatize all the businesses which can be better performed by the private sector. You'll be astonished that Government of India also had hotel running businesses. Now tell me, if government is owning hotel, that hotel will be run by a government servant, alright, he will be a government employee. Do you think any kind of customer service you'll be getting it? No, because he knows he'll get the salary whether the customer is happy or not. So people used to avoid government hotels. From the very first year it was incurring losses. Government also had software businesses which was known as Computer Maintenance Corporation of India Limited. From the very first year it was running at a loss. Why? Because the best minds will never go to a government organization, especially in the IT industry. Why? Because in the IT industry, if the government is running that organization, there is no incentive for performance. You can be promoted on a time by basis. If you join any government organization and you're getting a salary of 50,000, maybe after 10 years, you may start getting 75,000 or maybe 1 lakh rupees. But if you join any firm in the private sector and you're getting 50,000 rupees, say for example, and you have that will, you have that capacity to do work, you have that skill, then you may end up earning 5 lakh rupees or maybe 5 crore rupees in a matter of 10 years. So do you think the best minds in the country will ever join government organizations? No. So most of these businesses were running at a loss. So government said that if I'm running any organization at a loss, it means I have to pay the employees all the salary, but I'm not getting adequate profit. There is erosion of capital. These companies are becoming sick companies. The sick companies are those which are sick, earning losses after losses year after year after year after year. Alright, they have eroded their capital base. To run these institutions, government will have to impose more and more tax burden on people. So it means it is us who are running those loss-making institutions. If Air India is running at a loss, how do you think the government is financing it? From taxpayers' money. And if many of these institutions are running at a loss, can you imagine that government will have to impose taxes? And that was also one of the fundamental reasons why the taxes was very high before 1991 economic reforms. So government said we'll have to privatize now. And government started to privatize, unload its too much of baggage. What with the benefit of privatization will have come? So you see, privatization, first benefit is that you're reducing the load of the government. Second, when the government is selling that public sector undertaking in bulk, government will receive some amount of revenue. In fact, the company who are buying out government organizations, they are also buying out not only the asset but also the liabilities of the government. Government burden will be reduced. Government is getting some amount of money from the sale. And not only that, when the private sector is buying any institution from the government, any business organization from the government, they are not buying just to have a fun. They are buying it because they want it to prosper. They want to generate profit, because in the private sector, the most important objective of every business is profit making, wealth maximization, profit maximization. So they will, if they are running at a profit, if they are running at a profit, then they have to pay taxes to the government on their net profit. So initially government was imposing the burden on the people to run the private sector organization by government public sector undertaking. But now the same public sector undertaking has become a private sector player, from the profit is paying taxes to the government. It means government revenue is going to increase. Clear? Not only that, it will generate more employment, because when private sector are earning profit, they will expand. When they expand, they will generate more employment. When more employment is generated, it means more income for the people, and more income for the people, it means more direct tax sources for the government. So it's a win-win situation for the government. Just to give you one example, Computer Maintenance Corporation of India Limited was sold to Tata's, and a chunk of it became a part of the Tata Consultancy Services, which employs millions of people today. The quarterly profit of TCS is more than 3,000 crore rupees, quarterly profit. During the pandemic also, it made around that amount of profit quarter. It means in a year, TCS makes around 11 to 12,000 crore rupees of profit. If you take a flat rate of 20%, 25% on their net profit, it means government is getting 2,500 crore rupees approximately from TCS only. Alright, clear? So privatization is when government sells away ownership of the asset or service function from the public to the private sector. all right, from the public to the private sector. Now privatization can happen in various ways, all right. So but let's write it down. So privatization relate to sale of asset and or there was some problem with the reconnection. I think it's fine now. It had disconnected. So privatization relate to sale of asset and or service function from the public to the private sector. Now what do you mean? I know sale of asset. Say for example Air India, if it is privatized, all the asset, that is the air, the air buses, all there are many types of assets which will be sold by the government to sale of asset. But what is service function? Many a time you see government go for a mild privatization. It is not a complete privatization, but government says that privatization is not the solution for every problem. So let's say for example privatization is very good, but government cannot go for blind privatization of every asset. For example, Indian Railways is running at a loss after loss after loss, but government is not privatizing it. Why? Because more than 70% of the people who travel in Indian Railways are belong to lower middle income earning families and poor people. I'm not saying that rich do not travel in train. They also travel. There is first class, there is air conditioned coaches and so on. But that ratio is 30% or less. If you privatize it, do you think private sector will be running at it at a loss? They will increase the efficiency definitely, but the price of the ticket, which is so low right now, relatively low, it will increase significantly and people will not be able to afford. So you're snatching away a cheaper mode of transportation from a larger segment of the population. So we cannot privatize railway. We can privatize Indian Airlines, because those who can pay 10,000 rupees to travel from Delhi to Bangalore, they can pay 12,000 rupees or 13,000, 15,000 rupees as well. Alright, very poor people do not travel through airline. Clear? Not only that, there are a lot of people who are railway employees who get a lot of benefit. They get free healthcare. Railway has its own, hospitals, dedicated hospitals for the railway employees. Railway gives tickets to, subsidized ticket to the senior citizens, to the physically challenged people. There is subsidy for the women also given, for this defense personnel and so on. So you cannot privatize railway. So government say that government cannot privatize railways, but there are also various non-important functions. Non-important, I'm saying it is important, but government can easily hive it off. Government can easily outsource it. For example, catering services in railways, government doesn't need to run. Laundry services, which cleans all the bed sheets that you get in your AC coaches, government is not going to run a laundry business. So what government does? Government, it outsources, contracts out these functions to the private sector. Ticketing, outsourced to the private sector. So government can decide upon running and operations and expansion of the railway, but those functions which are not very important can be hived off to reduce the load of the government. Likewise, National Highways is owned by the government. We have a National Highway Authority of India. But government cannot set up toll tax booths. Alright. Do you think government can set up toll tax booth and put government employees there? What will happen after 5 years, 10 years when you don't need to collect a toll fee? You have to adjust those people because they will believe that they will retire only after 60 and you have to place them somewhere. So government doesn't want to add so much of baggage to the public sector. So government does what? Government contracts the collection of tolls to the private sector. So this is nothing but sale of or transfer of service function. Alright, transfer of service function. Ownership is with the government, but service function will be performed by the private sector. Alright. So which? So The government has not. On a trial basis, some routes government was trying to figure out can be privatized or not. Railway has not yet been completely privatized. No, government is owning the asset. Railways has not been. Government has difficulty in privatizing airline. Do you think it is so easy to privatize railway? It's not at all easy. Government can give contract for the construction of bogies, for maintenance of railway stations to the private sector. But the operations, running, management, deciding what should be the fare, it is all decided by the Department of Railways, which is looked after by the Ministry of Railway. Alright, clear. It has not yet been privatized. Now privatization, remember many a times privatization and disinvestment, students get confused. What is the difference between privatization and disinvestment? Alright, remember every disinvestment may not lead to privatization, but every privatization involved disinvestment. So let me write it here. Every privatization will involve disinvestment, but disinvestment may not always lead to privatization. Alright, what do I mean by this statement? What do I mean by this statement? You see, privatization is when government sells away at least 51% of the stake bulk of equity share to the private sector. Alright, if government is selling less than 50% of its share to the private sector, then it is disinvestment but not privatization. Now remember one thing here, many a time students get confused between private sector and private limited company and public sector and public limited company. Let's understand this thing once. For example, if I say private sector or public sector, let's take it first. If I take public sector, pay attention please. Public sector is at one hand. This will once and for all clarify all your doubt. And private sector. Remember the word sector with the public. It means at least 51% of the ownership is with the government. So we can say that at least 51% ownership is with the government. When I say at least, it means minimum 51%, maximum 100% it can go to. Right. But in the private sector, we say that at least 51% ownership, it means stake, should be with private individuals and entities. Now my question is, in the public sector, where did it go? In the public sector, we have public limited company. But my question is, can there be private limited company in the public sector? The answer most of you will give no, but yes, they can be also private limited company in the public sector. And in the private sector, can there be public limited company? You will get confused, but yes, there can be public limited company in the private sector, and obviously they can be private limited company. Now what do I mean by this here? You see, I've told you that at least 51% ownership is with the government. Now tell me, how do you think in terms of number of equity shareholders is defined in a public limited company according to the Companies Act 2000, Amendment Act 2013? Any company which has invited capital from the public and has at least 7 members to unlimited members. They can be millions. So now tell me, State Bank of India, Oil and Natural Gas Corporation Limited, ONGC, Steel Authority of India Limited, alright, are these public limited company? The answer is yes. Why? Because if you go to the stock market, secondary market, you can buy the equity shares because these companies are listed in the stock market. Bharat Heavy Electricals Limited, Bharat Electronic Limited, alright. So these companies are listed in the stock market. It means it has millions of shareholders holding different chunk of shares. You can also, if you have a demat account, buy equity shares of these companies. So according to Companies Act, isn't it a public limited company? Because even if you're holding one share, you are a shareholder in the company. It's a public limited company because millions of shareholders are holding the shares. Now it is in the public sector. Why? Because at least 51% ownership is owned by the government. It means has sold away 49% or less of the equity shares, alright, to mop up some amount of fund from the market. So these companies have significant more than 7 shareholders, significant lakhs of shareholders, but the biggest owner of the share is the Government of India. Clear? So this is a public sector company, these are all, but also a public limited company. Understood? Is it clear? In the private limited company, you have 2 to 200 participants. Alright. There are very few examples for this. For example, have you heard about Antariksh Corporation? Antariksh Corporation. Now, this is a private limited company in the public sector. Government is thinking about diversification, or the IPO can be launched for LIC. Now LIC has less than 200 equity shareholders. Some state government is holding, central government is holding, alright. So government, even RBI can hold some of the shares. For example, for NABARD, RBI is holding some of the equity shares. So what I want to say is that the number of owners of the stake is no more than 200. It is way less than even 10. So these are private limited company, but again completely owned by the government, so public sector. Now in the private sector, you can n number of companies which are public limited company. For example, Reliance Industries, RIL. Is it owned by Mukesh Ambani? No, it's a public limited company. You can also buy equity share. Yes, Mukesh Ambani is holding a chunk of the equity. Alright. So he can exercise a higher voting right in the board of directors. Alright. Likewise, ICICI Bank. It's a private sector bank. It's a public limited company. Millions of shareholders according to the Companies Act. Clear? Likewise, you can have so many companies, Baba. You have you have, say for example, Godrej, Infosys. There are more than 500 companies listed in Nifty 500, 250 companies listed in Nifty micro cap companies. So many companies are there. And private limited company, any one of us can start a private limited company. There are so many private limited companies. Tomorrow we can set up a private limited company when 2, 3, 4, 5 of the people they we want to start up any organization wherein we want to have a limited liability. We can go for limited liability partnership, but that's not a body corporate. But here we are talking about private sector, private limited company, so we can form a company also without inviting the capital or to be subscribed by the public. So private limited company, they can be so many different companies. Now you understood what is the difference between a public sector and a private sector. I hope it is clear. ITC is a private sector company, dear. Somebody has asked me what is ITC. ITC is a private sector company. Alright. Even if government is owning 49%, it's still a private sector company because majority is owned by the private individuals and entities. Alright. Clear. Now you will understand the difference between disinvestment and privatization. Now there are different types of privatization and disinvestment happen. Sometimes only for the namesake privatization is taking place, but actually privatization is not happening. Let's say we are running out of time, so many things to cover. I'll not be able to finish up this particular unit today. We'll take it up tomorrow also because there are a lot of things happened. I should have given 4 days to this particular unit only. Alright. So anyways, so you see, if suppose here you have government ownership and here you have private ownership. Private ownership, it means anybody from the general common public can buy the equity share, or any private institution can also buy. So private ownership. Alright. Now suppose government is owning 100% of the equity and 0 is owned by the private sector, then what is the nature of the company? What is the nature? First of all, whether it is disinvestment or privatization, whether it is disinvestment or privatization. So nothing is happening here, so we'll put a dash here. And nature of the company, obviously it will be a public sector undertaking. Public sector undertaking, or we call it as public sector enterprise. It means government owned business. When government holds 0%, or let's take slowly, let's go from here. Let's say government owns 51% of the equity and government sells away 49%. Now, is this disinvestment leading to privatization, or it is simply disinvestment not leading to privatization? Because when government is holding 51% equity, then it will still be a public sector undertaking or a public sector enterprise in the public sector. It can become a public limited company, but in the public sector. So I can say here, this is disinvestment not leading to privatization. Correct? If government owns 49% and sells away 51%, it means the nature of the company will change from the public sector to the private sector. This is disinvestment. If you understand this, you don't have to read anything from the book, you will be able to solve any question. Disinvestment leading to privatization. I am writing in short, privatization. Clear? Sometimes government can go for token privatization, but before that, many a times government will sell away the entire equity. Alright, the entire equity, like Computer Maintenance Corporation of India, I have told you. Alright, so government will hold 0% and sell away 100% of the equity to be subscribed by the common public and the private sector. For example, L&T, Larsen and Toubro. Alright, so this is also disinvestment leading to privatization, and the nature of the company will again be private sector. Then government sometimes may go for token privatization. Alright, token, but before that golden share is also there. Say for example, government will hold 26% of the equity and government will give away 74%. Now this is also disinvestment leading to privatization. It will turn into a private sector because government is selling away more than 51% of the equity. But what is the relevance of this of this 26%. This is known as golden share. It means government wants to privatize it, but government doesn't want to let go of its control. According to the Companies Amendment Act, if anybody who is holding 26% of the equity, then they have the veto power to stop the company from making any kind of structural adjustments. For example, amendment of the Memorandum of Association, Articles of Association, appointment of managing director, changing the authorized share capital of the company. So here government is saying, I am giving it to the private sector to operate, but I will be a silent spectator. If I think that you are doing something which goes against the spirit for which that company was privatized, then I will come and use my veto power. It means I will vote against the majority resolution. Alright, clear? That's why we called it golden share. But many a times we go for token privatization also. Alright, so here government will own 90% of the equity. So disinvestment is selling away the equity share here. Investment, when you buy the equity, disinvestment, you're selling away the equity. When government sells away 100% of the equity, it will lead to privatization. When government disinvest 100% of the equity, it will lead to privatization. When government disinvest, sells away only 49% or less, it will disinvestment again, but not privatization. Disinvestment is the opposite of investment. When I buy some share, investment. When I sell away, disinvestment. Clear? Alright. So 90% ownership, but government sells away 10% or less. Now tell me, this is also disinvestment because government is disinvesting, selling away 10% of the equity, but not leading to privatization. It means the nature of the company will remain a public sector undertaking or a public sector enterprise, whatever you call it, ownership. But why does government do it? Why government sells away 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 up to 10% of the equity? This is known as token privatization. Token privatization. It means privatization actually is not happening. This is a token gesture. When you pay token for, to reserve any, for example, you want to buy a flat, you give token money. You don't become the owner of the asset. When you give in token money, the owner is the same. Unless you make the full payment, you don't become the owner. So actually this is not privatization. This is not privatization. This is simply disinvestment. So why government do go for it? Many a times government has a fiscal deficit, which is very, very significant. A small amount of fiscal deficit, no problem. Government can borrow and can take care of many of the things. But sometimes the fiscal deficit is very high. Now government cannot raise taxes every time on the public, every time on the business, because it leads to negative sentiment in the minds of the businessmen that government is frequently raising taxes. How we are going to survive in the competitive market. So what government does, in order to not invite too much of a negative emotions from the public, government will sell away 2 or 3 or 4% of the equity share of any public sector undertaking to mop up some amount of equity, mop up some amount of money from the market and take care of its functioning. Is just part of the fiscal policy. So that's why we call it as token privatization. Sir, platinum means platinum company. Oh my god, whatever. Clear, there is nothing like so I think this is clear. What is the difference between privatization and disinvestment? You will be getting around 2 to 3 questions from here. They will be asking you what is privatization, what is disinvestment, what is so on, delegation, and you see. Now delegation, you see what is delegation? Delegation is government is owning the asset, government is only delegating the service function. This is similar to privatization of service function. So government says that I am not going to sell away the asset, the government will remain the owner of the asset, but unimportant service function can be performed by the private sector. So government keeps hold of the responsibility of the private enterprise, right? Keeps hold of the responsibility, and the private enterprise handles fully or partly the delivery of product or services. Railways, ownership is with the government, but ticketing has been hived off to the private sector. Contract, franchisee, grant, leasing also. Displacement, see, displacement government doesn't do. I'll be teaching you about crowding out effect in your intermediate. Displacement is when government is not privatizing, government is not losing the control. Just give me 2-3 minutes more. Government does what? Nothing. But a public sector is displaced by the private sector because the public sector is not able to give quality services to the people at an affordable price. For example, Jio, Airtel, Vodafone, all these private sector telecom companies are providing a lot of value added services to the people. But MTL and BSNL are not able to catch up. Alright. So people are largely choosing to go with the private sector telecom companies rather than with the government. That is MTNL, BSNL. So we say that displacement has happened. It means government is owning, but these are running at a loss because people don't want to consume the products sold by the entity owned by the government. So ownership is with the government, but it has been displaced by the private sector. Clear? Disinvestment is given here. So private enterprise expands and gradually displaces the government entity. The government monopoly through BSNL, MTNL has been displaced by the private telecom companies. Clear? Yeah. Outsourcing is nothing but delegation. All right. Disinvestment, selling a portion of ownership stake in public enterprise to private party. Difference between disinvestment and privatization I have already told you. Now, but remember one thing, many times they ask you, what if, and students also ask me, sir, what if 50-50 ownership is there? What if government is owning 50% of the company, of the asset, and private sector is owning 50%? Here you don't have to define the nature, but this is something which is also known as disinvestment for the purpose of starting a joint venture. All right, this is disinvestment for the purpose of starting joint venture. All right, so keep that in mind. 50-50 ownership. All right. See the lot of things here in this chapter. So globalization and everything about FDI, FII and so many other things will be starting tomorrow. So I am not be able to finish this particular unit today. I will finish it off. I'll try to finish it off tomorrow, but if not tomorrow, we'll see what can be done. All right. So sorry, not tomorrow. You don't have class tomorrow. You have day after tomorrow. I beg your pardon. You don't have class tomorrow. You have day after tomorrow from 8:30 to 9:30. You have those classes. All right. We'll continue this particular unit. All right. Dear, somebody is asking displacement. Displacement is like when nobody is buying the product sold by the government. All right, government entity. People prefer the private sector. So MTNL, BSNL, if they continue to earn loss for a even longer period of time, government will have to sell it away. So it means when the private sector gives big competition to the government entity and the government entity is not able to match the services provided by the private sector, because most of the people will go and buy the goods and services offered by the private sector company rather than from the government company. It means this company has been displaced, has been kicked away by the private sector. They have not been able to compete. The government is owning, but these companies are not able to compete with the private sector. That is displacement. All right. So good night, everyone. We'll meet tomorrow again. Day after tomorrow again. That is from 9:30 to 10:30. Clear? Good night. Bye bye. Take care.